better than being outside. Other than that, I can't think of anything redeeming to say about the weather, so. All right. Has everybody had an opportunity to look at the notes from the last meeting? Any comments, any corrections, or should we accept them?
Yeah, we did receive some comments from Duncan. We have those available. So, Duncan, do you want to just quickly review those with folks? I've got them here if you want to email.
No, I've got it here. One, there was just a word.
Please use the microphone, please.
Yeah, there was, on page 4 in the first paragraph at the end of it, you said, "We more input from more stakeholders." I think it should have read, "We need input from more stakeholders," or "need more input." And the other, I believe, was on page 6. The second set of bullets, the first one, I think it should be Duncan suggested that the town should consider a parking structure funded through a public-private partnership.
Okay, if there are no objections, we'll make those corrections. And we know that Mr. Black reads the notes copiously. Thank you. Any others? If not, accept them? Okay, fine. All right, moving right along. Mr. Eisenweiser is here, and he's really glad to be here tonight because it's so...
I put my cold weather clothes on.
You did?
Yeah.
That's your cold weather clothes?
Well, I didn't bring the heavy cold weather clothes. There's more to come. Thank you. So, can you guys hear me just fine? Yes. The microphone, I think, is mostly for the recording at this point. Dal and I have had a bit of a discussion about the challenges that we perceived kind of post-charrette, kind of what were the takeaways? What did we figure out? One of the things that we figured out was that we didn't do a very good job of explaining what the existing zoning allows. So I wanted to take just a moment to make sure that folks got a chance to see visually some of the elements that are of some concern to us from the existing zoning. Because I think we should have explained that the first time around and didn't. So let's assume that you have GB zoning, general business. General business zoning currently allows 65 feet of height, which is either 5 or 6 stories. It's 5 stories if you had done a tall retail floor, but if you do standard stories for office or residential, it would be 6 stories, or it could be 6 stories. So it allows that height through site plan review, not through the town board, not through variance, through standard site plan review. It allows a vehicular use area between the building and the street. In other words, you can have a driveway, so this could be a fast food restaurant or something else with a driveway between the building and the street. It allows for a 10-foot wide vehicular use area. It does require an additional setback, often called a step back, at about 2 stories in height. So what you're seeing in this image would be a representation of a parcel. Let's say it might be along Main Street. We actually were looking at a specific parcel along Main Street, but it could be a parcel on Transit Road, it could be a parcel on Sheridan. If it were zoned GB, and I can tell you, for example, the Key Bank site in Eggertsville is zoned GB. So theoretically, on the Key Bank site, once you've torn that building down, you can go to town building something that's like this. Go ahead. The visual representation there, what is your building setback at?
Whatever the minimum setback in the district is, which I can't tell you what it is. 20 feet, Gary's suggesting. And then this is the 10-foot, just right here, we've sort of shown a
10-foot vehicular use area in front, but 20 feet. So sidewalk, et cetera, and then 20 feet back from that. So if you'll remember during the charrette discussion, we talked about the west of Village site being 3 stories tall. And so this is simply a representation of 3 stories on that same site. Now the building is set closer to the street, like the Mosey is right this minute. We have pulled it up to the back edge of the sidewalk, so that setback of 20 feet isn't here in this model. And here's the 2 models a little differently, so that you can kind of see down into the site as though we were flying over. So here you're seeing that 20 feet of setback, kind of pushing the buildings back a little bit from the street. So from the street, those buildings would seem fairly far away. The Mosey is at the back of sidewalk, so it's a fair distance closer to the street than this one is shown. The key about this is this building type could exist all the way around that site. So this is the example of the Tops Market site that's right here, right now. So if one were to be able to acquire each of the pieces of land in that area, the one major piece, and then the landscape site, and a few more little sites here, and the little houses here, you could develop a series of 5-story buildings throughout that site. This is a site that, for the most part, is untouched by the 3-to-1 bulk plane that comes up from the residential neighborhoods. Why is that? Because it doesn't have the right kind of zoning abutting it that triggers that bulk plane. So there is nothing to impact these buildings reaching back to the back of the property. Now, the back of this property happens to face a public park. It doesn't face any single-family houses. So this is what the zoning allows today. So if you were to be able to collect the land up, that's what you would see. Now, if you remember, we had proposed to keep the front portion of the site at 3 stories and only the very back portion at 5 stories. It was just a concept for building the charrette summary report, for being able to talk to people about if height is appropriate, how should it land, what should that street edge look like. We'd heard a lot. Again, I seem to be focusing heavily on the Mosey, but we could be focusing on the Hyatt. We heard a lot about building placement. So in the terms of the Mosey, people felt it was too tall at the street. In terms of the Hyatt, the opposite. You know, they felt like it had all been pressed to the back of the site. So that's where this set comes from. Go ahead.
Again, the scenarios are showing existing. Does it quantify required parking for that building?
No. So when you look at this, I don't think they could surface park it on this site.
So it's unrealistic, right?
A little bit. But the point would be you could put the most anywhere. So you could end up with Tops back here, but with 3 5-story buildings at the front, and none of the intervening buildings. And then you could probably park it on all the rest of the space that's there.
Structured parking is still permitted.
Structured parking would be allowed, so you could certainly bring that into play, and by the time you got to this number of 5-story buildings, it would likely be in play. There is just, you know, if you want to go digging back in it, there is one of the examples from Saratoga Springs in the precedent report. I don't really want to harp on it, but basically, if you see on page 15 of the precedent report, if you happen to have yours with you, you'll see there is a 4-story, a 5-story, and a 2-story building. And all of those together generate this entire huge parking field back behind. So not even at this intensity of 5, 5, and 5, and it's already generating this size of parking field, which is pretty well parked up in the image. So the likelihood of really getting one of those, you know, like that surface parked is pretty slim. On the other hand, this one maybe, we might be closer, especially with some shared parking provisions that allowed the restaurants and office users to offset each other, perhaps some things like that. You know, perhaps a little bit more reasonable. The ones that were done in the charrette report are parked. So each of the ones shown here is actually parked. So just two more, actually it's three more images, but the streetscape. So as you're standing on the sidewalk, what might it seem like? So here's that 20-foot setback that we were just talking about. There's the possibility, not the obligation, but the possibility you could have a drive lane coming between the building and the street. So here's a version of that just without the drive lane, so you get some sense of what the public realm might look like without the drive lane. And then this is the version that we did, in which, again, we pulled the building a little closer to the street, but it's stopping at 3 stories. So I offer these up, and we'll post these as well. I offer these up only so that people can kind of understand a little bit about what the current zoning allows, because I think without this view here, without saying this is possible today with nobody's intervention, because the minute you go to site plan, if you meet all the rules, they've pretty much got to approve you. So today, this is what we would call a by right project.
Lee,
Yes, sir.
is there a place in the Pilot Center report, a charrette report, to explain that and add a couple of illustrations like that?
We could, and that's worth talking about. Yes, it could be added as an appendix to the charrette report, for sure.
I think it's important to note, although it's by right, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to take that form, because right now, it's a minimum setback.
Yes.
Whereas what's being proposed is a maximum setback, so.
But can we agree, that if the applicant brought this forward at this location, the planning board might suggest that he move it back on the site, but they could only suggest, because this does actually meet the regulation. In the end, after a open public discussion of it, they would be forced to back down if the applicant
I don't know.
wanted to move forward.
I know as myself, I would prefer what was proposed, rather than pushing it back.
Mhm.
I wouldn't have the ability to actually
Make them.
shape that.
Yes.
As we now put some standards in the zoning law that allow us.
Correct. Unless he's got to break the rules in some fashion, and he's in front of Gary, and Gary can actually make him do stuff. You have the authority. You have the authority to condition him in regard to whatever their issues are. So if he wants additional height, you could make him step it back. If you want, whatever his variance is, you have some ability to condition the
Can the
approval.
code also suggest maximum setbacks?
Of course. Yes. Absolutely. Because we could see this building in the tops location on that site. Right? The exact same building, 5 stories tall, as that image was drawn. If you jump into the charrette report, that image in the Pilot Center section is on page 33. So in the back of that image is the 5-story building in place of the tops, right? So we do have it pushed back here. Why? Because there's nothing behind it. There's a park back behind it. There's no neighbors back behind it. So there isn't any reason to be concerned about the height, so moving the height away from Main Street makes some sense. So you're just seeing a version in which we've done that. Now, if you happen to glance at the previous page, this proposed character map, this pink map, that's kind of showing you what the zoning map might say about the height. So we would literally put a zoning district line through the center of that where we've got the difference between 3 and 5. So yes, it would say up front 3, in the back 5. It would be a requirement. Now, could somebody then ask Gary for an additional story in the front? Yeah, it'd be pretty hard to prove a hardship. Pretty please, I want an additional story, but other than that, they would actually just be breaking the rules. It's a little different from, gosh, I have this problem in my garage. I need 4 more compact spaces instead of standard size spaces because of this big column in my dumpster, or whatever. Something much more practical like that is the kind of thing he's supposed to be giving relief for, where we can't imagine every circumstance. But here, where we've thought it through and we said 3 and 5, maybe you get to move that line a little bit, but, you know, you're not supposed to be changing it all up into 4 and 6, or, you know, whatever.
So you're suggesting having lines splitting parcels?
We may.
Large parcels?
We may, to a specific depth. And I think on Main Street only is where this idea is appropriate. I think nobody has said anything. If you look at the drawings for Sheridan, for Transit Road, nobody suggested they have any, you know, any issues with bringing height closer up to those larger roads. But Main Street, because of the village environment immediately adjacent on either end, there is some concern about this. How many of you looked at have driven past the new office building coming up east of the village? It's up and out of the ground. So how are you feeling about that building's relationship to the street? Yeah, so there are a number of people that are already feeling like that one is a little too tight to the street, even though it's only 3 stories tall. It's still, the sense of enclosure that's coming from that building, you know, is troubling to people. So I think as we work through some of these issues, that's the kind of thing that we're going to be talking about. So I wanted to...
explain the, you know, what our purpose is here, why we're meeting every month. We have a zoning code, and then to present what a type of structure that could be built on the current zoning code. And then hopefully, we're trying to improve the zoning code as far as height is concerned, to show the examples that when we're all said and done, that the height will be lower. Because height just made some inference to about height not being an issue in the town. I think it always will be.
In certain places.
Well, right. But in the mixed-use activity centers that we're dealing with. But so as long as we can share what exists now and what it's going to be, to make that more clear, I think, to the residents. Also, the height in the background, now there's a Hampton Inn on Main Street.
Yes.
Now, that's around 4 stories, I think.
5, maybe?
Actually, I drove by it today, I counted 4.
Maybe it's 4.
And it's, you know, set back.
Yes.
Now, no one seems to mention that, and I think because it is set back.
I suspect we could talk to the neighbors behind, and they were a little concerned.
They would have an issue, but you know, from the front.
Yes.
But the 3-story across from Williamsville South, I think...
Too close up to the street.
Too close,
feels
right.
too intense.
So...
Somewhere in between, there's a happy medium.
2 to 3 stories, not right on top of the street.
So we're working our way towards that, and I guess I'm going to skip ahead to talk about really what we're hoping to change in terms of these 2 documents, because I know that Dow would like you guys to accept them so we can move beyond them. Yeah, Bill?
Just bring up that building one more time.
Yes.
That building's mostly in the village of Williamsville. Now, if it was built down in Amherst, it would have to be 115 feet from the center line of Main Street. That would be setback without variance. In fact, I think Duncan gave a variance to the 10 or 15% of it that's in the town itself.
Because yours is really the parking lot. You're right. You're right. I apologize. That's true. That is that's not just a mixed-use building, it's a mixed community building. It sits half in and half out of the town. So yes, point well taken. But it's good because it exists and we can look at it, we can talk about it, you know, it's going to be there. So a couple of things. In debriefing with staff about the documents that are here, the Charette Summary Report, which is really primarily documentation of what went on during the Charette Week, and the Precedent Report, which is the provision of a series of examples that people can refer to in talking about real things, since we didn't necessarily have enough right here in Amherst to point to, nor in Buffalo for that matter, of new mixed-use development activity. What we have proposed to do, the Precedent Report needs an introduction that does a better job explaining why we prepared it, and so we're going to add an introduction to the very front. We also add a fascinating point made to us by one of the town board members today. I held one-on-ones with the town board members through the course of today, which was that we started this document with some of the most intense projects, and we ended it with some of the least intense projects, and that it would be preferred if it went the other way around. That if the lower intensity projects were shown first as precedents, leading to the higher intensity projects. I don't have any problem with doing that. I want to just simply show them all. So here they are. So those are the two proposed changes to this, but we would like you to move forward with regard to it anyway and move on. We're not adding content other than the introductory piece. Same thing with the charrette summary report. I think there was perhaps a bit of misunderstanding about my statement that we're not going to change the drawings, which sounded like me being grumpy about not changing my mind about something, but was instead really to say, let me say it more effectively this time, the activity of the charrette is documented here, and therefore it's not changing. I don't have access to these designers beyond that period. So the document isn't changing, but the concepts may well morph a lot as they find their way into zoning. So I think that whether it's the heights, the kinds of uses we're showing, any of those kinds of things, the site layouts, all of those are fair game for further discussion. Again, the only thing that we're proposing to do right this minute to the charrette summary report, although I kind of heard and ask for one additional thing, we are going to put a why did we hold the charrette and what are these documents for. I think the key thing that we wanted to do with this document was to begin a community conversation about all of the kinds that you see in it. What kinds of frontages should there be? What kinds of heights and buildings should be allowed on the site? What kinds of transitions to adjacent sites? All of those topics are included here, and they have started, I believe, a very good community conversation about the issues. So an introduction that establishes sort of what the intent of the charrette was and what the takeaway is, and lets us move beyond the drawings, right? We don't need to be waving the drawings all the way up to the bitter end of the project. We can use those and change the concepts from them and move forward. I did hear a suggestion that we include the modeling as an appendix to that, since we've sort of added that post-charrette, and I think that's fine and makes sense. We'll have to annotate it a little bit so people understand it, but we could do that and include that material so people would have a little better understanding of that issue. And with that, I'm going to give the microphone back to Dal for just a minute to talk with you guys about whether you're ready to accept those two documents and move on. Yes, sure.
Maybe before we get that far, the introduction or the summary or whatever
Yeah.
you're going to add to the charrette report.
Yes.
Is it intended to, in the end, as a deliverable, stand on its own, or is everything going to be put together? What I'm looking for is what's the context of this report in the overall project?
Yeah.
Is that going to be added to this, or is this...
This document stands alone. After this, the next documents start to become, these are both a deliverable under our contract with NYSERDA.
So if they're going to stand alone, is there going to be enough context in that introduction so we understand that this is step 2 of a 4-step process that's leading to the...
Yes, that is the hope, and that we'll also explain that step 2 does not necessarily set the answers for steps 3, 4, and 5. It just starts the conversation. So that, you're right, that's a key kind of concept to embed in there, and the staff comments to our firm included that and suggested that. We talked about that briefly with the town board members today, and I think there is a consistent sense that the community needs to understand why these processes existed, why the documents existed, what we were hoping to get out of it all. So yes, we hope to do a decent job of explaining that. So, Dal?
All right. In my discussion with Lee, one of the things that I find most interesting is we've got a process that's taken us to this point so we can understand what the public would like. The charrettes really had an opportunity for the public to be able to express to us what they liked and what they didn't like. Then we had an opportunity to look at it and discuss it, and we've done that at last month's meeting, and again, somewhat tonight. These two reports are really to fulfill contract obligations with NYSERDA. They're not binding. They don't mean we have to live by everything that's in here. They're going to change. What I'm looking forward to is the mapping, which is at the next meeting, and at the following meeting, text. Those are the things that we have to really zero in on and make sure that we're in agreement on. This is reporting stuff. This is conceptual. So unless somebody has a problem with it, I'm recommending that we send the reports on to NYSERDA. Are we in agreement?
With the additional...
Yes, right. Any additional will be done, by the way. He will write it, staff will review it, and I will review it also. Because I think pretty much at this point, we all in agreement of what we want to see in there, and the recommendations that came from the town board today. And if you would like to see it before it goes out, that would be fine too. Okay? So we're going to send it on. Agreed? Okay. No, it's not binding. Non-binding.
It does help you get paid.
Yes. And it also says to NYSERDA that we are following their rules and we're stepping up to the point where we're going to actually get something done, okay? This was all great in context. We're not open for public discussion, sir. No. We're in agreement? Okay. So we'll send it on. Okay, now, the next piece is important because now we're going to start talking about what you think.
So, the next steps are to begin the process of the final deliverables. The final deliverables are really, in a sense, three separate things. One, comprehensive plan amendment that tells us in the comprehensive plan what the character of all of the activity centers and commercial centers are so that we can more successfully match proposed zoning to those centers, right? So instead of a one color, one type of star map in the future, we have a more varied system that has more flavors in it based on the discussions we've been holding. It could well be we're going to start with the presumption that that typological system that we all kind of talked about, the notion of having shallow lots treated differently from deep lots, treated differently from the edge of Main Street, treated differently from, I don't remember what the last one was, there's a fifth one. But each of those typological areas theoretically having different zoning rules. So it's really headed towards that. Staff and our firm are going to start work on a draft map that would say, in place of this map that you've been using for 10 years now, you'll have a new map. And following that will come the proposed text for the code itself that actually has new zoning districts which would implement that map. The other piece that we've been talking about is that if the plan map is correct and the zoning text is correct, then we should zone them, and that would be the third piece, the actual proposed zoning map, which then begins a conversation about, all the way back up the ladder, did we get its characterization right in the plan, and therefore did we pick the right zoning for it? So these next set of products, instead of being conceptual and totally to illicit conversation, start to become the real regulatory documents that are the end result of the project. So, yeah, go ahead, Dana.
The graphic that will be presented for the amendment to the town plan,
Yes,
how broad will the geography be?
the entire town. It replaces, what map is that? Map 10, map something? It replaces the generalized land use map.
To the point where if someone wants to come in for a rezoning request in proximity to that generalized area, there'll be some discretion at staff level as to what that means as far as geography? And that's what I'm getting at.
This is a point of conversation that we've not finished the discussion on. It is possible that that plan map will reflect current parcel boundaries. And if so, then if you were outside those parcel boundaries, you'd actually have to amend the plan map and then move on and amend your zoning. It is possible that included in that, in the end, it could be that the town board is not ready to sort of rezone or pre-zone all of the properties. Maybe there are some troublesome properties that people think really need to be dealt with individually. And so there may be some that in the end don't end up as part of the zoning map. So again, then the comp plan map will sort of tell you it's okay to talk about rezoning, but you're going to have to come in and rezone. Yes.
You talk about the entire town.
Yes.
You're just talking about
The centers and not...
just the commercial.
The commercial centers and the mixed-use activity centers, yes. So the geography is all of those across the entire town, but not the residential areas, not the industrial areas, not the office areas, only the mixed-use activity centers identified in the plan already, and the commercial centers identified in the plan.
I think it's
Still a lot of geography.
very important to define that geography.
Yeah.
Get that.
My concern is if we don't adequately define the geography in the comp plan graphic, it's going to get loose to the point where we no longer have the defined centers we're looking at based on existing features and the massing we want to create. So I'm a little concerned about how we do that. And I just want to express my concern for how we represent that graphic that's going to be part of the comp plan.
Yep. So, I'm gonna pull up the plan just real quickly so that we can have a look at that map.
Lee, while you're pulling that up, just let me clarify, when that plan map was first done, it was done on a parcel-by-parcel basis. And it was a conscious effort to essentially generalize that, to obliterate to a certain degree the parcel boundaries, to provide some flexibility for interpretation. So if we are going to a plan map, which is parcel by parcel, that represents a change in the philosophy that we used when we did the original plan. And to some degree, it kind of goes outside what we're doing here today. I think the approach that we have now to do the plan map in a more general form and then go to the zoning map in a very detailed form is parcel by parcel. I think that's the proper way to deal with particular issues that we're dealing with.
So the challenge here really is that Ramona's question really, kind of pinned it right down. That pink that's on there, I pretty much bet if we look on the zoning map, we can see the zoning that implements that pink. And that none of it is zoned single-family residential or yellow inside that pink. That's my guess. It's just a guess. But if we were to look at the zoning, we could pretty well figure out it's already implementing this map. It may be not implementing it in the way we envision now after we've had this richer conversation, but my guess is that underneath that is commercial zoning. What Rick is bringing up is, if I had, there's one apparently in the system right now, a single-family parcel. It happens to be adjacent to other areas with commercial zoning. It wants to be something else other than single-family. Do we have the ability to zone that commercially? Do we have the flexibility to do that? Or because I drew this map so definitively, do I have no opportunity to do that? Now I actually have to go change the plan map first, and after changing the plan map, then I can ask, do I get a two-step instead of a one-step in my rezoning? So it's certainly a topic for conversation. It's gotten harder and harder to blur these lines because we build more and more exact maps. Our tools are so much better. In the old days, our tools were Zipatone and whatever, and, life was a lot easier back then. All the lines were blurry. The width of your pen alone could strike out 2 lots on on a property. But what we were talking about, just to make sure everybody knows, from the colors of this, red is going to be part of the proposal, pink is part of the proposal, and stars are part of the proposal. So anything you see on there that's red or pink or a star is part of this mapping exercise. So the office parks, not. The multifamily, not. The single family, not.
So you're gonna take this figure, which is generally parcel-based, and for those commercial areas, you're going to make recommendations that are going to be more generalized.
Yes, so for
Big
example,
magic marker?
you may remember these are shallow parcels. So instead of just red, we're going to have red 1, and then where it gets deeper parcels, we might have red 2. And over here on Transit, where on Niagara Falls Boulevard, where we have really deep parcels, we may get red 3. 3 different flavors of commercial instead of just one, which then theoretically point to options within the zoning ordinance. Within those, use the shallow lot tool, use the deep lot tool, use the transition tool, use the, whatever the tools are that we come up with in the set. Some of these are much more close to abutting single-family neighborhoods. Snyder and Eggertsville, poster childs for that, right? But there are others. Kensington, for example. We haven't talked as part of this report about Kensington Harlem at all, and yet the same tools theoretically are going to apply. We've talked about the deep site on Northtown. Does that deep site rule apply to, a deep site over here on Transit Road? Right? Are those the same kinds of outcomes? So we'll be working with staff to do a first cut at that, and then this group is definitely going to get an opportunity to talk about that first map. In fact, we've set some dates for you that Dal will talk to you about a little bit later on. So Brian, did you have a...
Yeah, I just, when you're doing this, this map itself, because of the way it's been drawn over the years, it starts to get into a level of specificity that you mentioned earlier that probably wasn't originally intended, but you can clearly see where there's gaps of single-family detached residential that's been protected versus the sort of impeding whatever colors next to it. My concern, I think, is twofold. First, there's a lot of residents in the town who are going to be looking for this project to see where does it impede upon their residential, where does it fall, where does that boundary line? So not crafting a boundary line and not protecting residential communities explicitly is going to make it look like there's a spread or a prevailing wisdom that says we should allow these
to be converted somehow.
Yeah. And I don't know that that's the intent. I think the intent is to transform. So somehow dealing with that boundary is going to be important. It can't just be this amorphic blob.
I'm personally a fan of doing the initial mapping and the initial conversation as a parcel-based map. I think, and it would be my typical approach to simply follow the existing zoning. There is a follow-on conversation then to be held about immediately adjacent parcels and whether they should be carried along in this process or not. And I think anything that's solidly single-family and doesn't have a little offices in it and whatever, I think everybody's going to say that's single-family. It's going to show up as a little in-holding somewhere. So it's a challenge to figure that out.
Very carefully over the scope of work. When we went into this, talking about the red areas on the map, to deal with those areas, and then to go beyond that and look at areas which are not currently zoned with a commercial use. I think that goes beyond the scope of work we have here, and again, I'd be very concerned about that. I think if we get the zones correct, and we get them down according to where they should be under the current pattern, we'll be way ahead of the game.
Yes.
We can then move forward at some point in the future, and then if the town board so desires, take a look at those areas adjacent or other areas, or they say, well, maybe these residential uses are no longer appropriate here, and we need to take another look at them.
Yeah,
but I would be very, very concerned about trying to do that at the same time we're trying to accomplish the goals we've set for our existing commercial areas.
Understood. Thank you, Rick, for that. That would equally apply, as we've been talking internally, to the question of CF-zoned land, to the question of this commercial office land. There are some other properties which these tools may be appropriate for when we get done with them, but which this project is not going to designate. Simply not. So,
Lee, and one more thing, the other concern that I have is that when we started this process, the agreement was, I think the agreement was with the town board and hopefully with the residents of the town, that we're only going to look at the existing commercial areas. Going beyond that, to me, would be beyond what we told the residents of this town that we were going to do.
So unfortunately, that means that the comprehensive plan isn't going to have a whole lot of guidance on that issue. We can talk about the transitions and talk about them being potentially appropriate and worth examining further, but that's probably as far as the plan amendment can go then in terms of anything that's adjacent to red.
I think the way that you were, move it up in mind, the way we, the way you originally conceptualized this is the proper way to do it. Let's focus on the areas that we said we were going to focus on. Take those red areas and those pink areas, and then apply the new geographies that we're talking about, the new zone types. Apply those to those areas, and I think if we do that and we do that effectively, we'll have reached our goal.
Okay. Brian?
So back to the question.
Yeah.
You're going to work on parcel by parcel basis?
Yeah.
At first?
Yeah. So this is the very next deliverable, the very next conversation you guys have, and just since we're kind of talking about it, the technical committee would meet internally on the 11th of January. The working committee, which is you guys, would meet on the 18th of January to have this map discussion. The zoning text, which would be the companion piece to this, the districts itself and their allowed uses, their heights and intensities, would come to the technical committee on the 8th of February and you on the 22nd of February. So that would be the start of the discussion of the text. It may in the end take you more than one meeting to discuss both the map and the text. And then when some general agreement that we've not made any errors, whether we've set the correct policy or not is an open question, but once we get past whether we really have any errors, then we'll go and begin to brief the town board and others on the...
The 18th of January, is that shown then?
We were hoping to, only because of schedule conflicts for most everybody else. Did you have a schedule conflict on the 18th? Dang. Ramona, you're killing me. So, yeah, Dan will talk to you about whether we can figure out something that works better. Is it just that day, or is it that week, or?
The day, preferably earlier in the month, we can make board meeting on Saturday.
Okay.
Just like the 23rd and
Okay. We'll,
that week, you know, and if we make the town board on Tuesday, right?
yeah, we were.
And in February, doesn't the town board have a anomalous schedule in that you plan around the Association of Towns meeting?
Yes, we hadn't voted on it, set it for next year, but what we voted on last year included the 17th, so that's definite.
Okay.
We'll go back and we'll look at that again.
Okay.
So let me be clear though, there is no meeting in December. So although the agenda indicates there's a meeting on the 14th, we will not...
Scratch that one.
Lee, I had another question.
Yes.
We've been talking about things like height and bulk and area. When do you anticipate getting into things like process? There's some new tools out there that provide new tools where we can improve the engagement with the residents of the town in making these decisions, particularly once the zones are in place. When will we begin to explore those tools and how we can incorporate them into the process that we use in the code?
So I think typically we would bring, after the districts and uses module, if you will, of the draft text, which is the first piece you would see is, what are the basic building blocks that implement the plan. After that, theoretically, perhaps as early as the following month, you'd be looking at things like recommendations regarding landscaping, lighting, some of the other general development standards that would apply to all of the districts, and process. So those pieces would come as a, if you will, a second half of the code text.
Is that when we begin to address issues like incorporating some form of, I don't like to use the term architectural control, but architectural guidelines?
So, the initial districts and uses will have some controls for those elements. Anything that we would consider a standard, meaning a measurable, quantifiable thing, we'll try to include in with the districts themselves. So if we decide to try to manage materials, for example, or other elements of urban design associated with the buildings, those would be in the initial text draft. If we, in our discussions with staff in advance, decide on any kind of design review model, that would normally also rely on criteria or guidelines that are part of the design review process that kind of help you think about what your job is as the design reviewer and keep you kind of on the straight and narrow in regard to that task. Those would come with the procedure. At this point, we could see the procedure as being anything from, equivalent to your current site plan review, with perhaps no need for change to your site plan review process, all the way over the spectrum would run from that to staff level design review is sometimes done, and then at the outside end of the option would be sort of external public design review. But it could be even that the site plan review process requires some improvements to process, like pre-application neighborhood meetings that would occur before you're even allowed to submit, other kinds of things that would engage the community in a conversation about the development. So we'll have a chance to talk about that a little internally, and then I think we'll draft our best example of that and of wherever we land on that, and offer that up as code language for you. Yes.
Just a question about the entitlement process, and
Yep.
yeah, I wouldn't doubt that this isn't part of the scope, but in this day and age of using the cloud, I guess this is more of a question. Do you encounter any municipalities requiring that documents in preparation for going through an entitlement process be uploaded to some kind of cloud-based system that the town controls, so that all those, instead of personally, physically walking those documents down to the town hall and run the risk of them getting lost?
So a lot of folks have a building permit system intact that is a computer-based system. The applications go into the system. System then throws up onto the web whatever the public is appropriate for the public to see. Either it's just an application has been submitted for this property, or sometimes they can see the whole application packet. But then it shows you each step of the way who's signing off on it. Hey, Stormwater signed off on it on Tuesday. The fire chief looked at it. He signed it. You can actually watch the permit go through the process. So we've seen a number of systems like that. What I haven't seen that you seem to be hinting a little bit at is that sort of pre-application conversation part of the piece be a cloud-based approach. And there's nothing wrong with thinking about that. I think, the notion of having an applicant meet with the public in advance of submitting an application is so that they've heard especially immediate neighbor concerns about their property and can respond to them in their application out of the kindness of their hearts, not because they necessarily need to include those elements, but because they choose to smooth their path through the approval process. Of course, any application that meets the standards, should theoretically be approved in a by right process. And so it's important for us to set the rules correctly first and foremost to get those correct outcomes. So to pre-think about what the neighbors are concerned about, the height of fences, the stormwater that might approach their property, light and glare from parking lots, noise from immediately adjacent restaurants or outdoor entertainment areas. We should have thought of most of those issues and handling those in the code document itself, in a technical way, so that people can be comfortable that if outdoor dining establishment is coming, it's not going to be an intrusion on the neighborhood. But having the design of your building be something the community can look at and respond to is something that I would think many proactive developers would try to do anyway. And so maybe there is a way to think about having some discussions in advance of submission that allow for better design. And hopefully eliminate variances at the tail end. I think, one of the things that we are doing, Gary, just so that you know, is we have been talking with staff about the variances that are received by various projects, and we are going to try to build a system here that requires less variances. I'd like to put you out of business in regard to some of this stuff. There will still be some things that people will ask about, but it is the variance becomes the tool of the broken code is really what it comes down to, and we're not quite at that stage, but we're kind of close. So we need to catch ourselves before we really get there. Anyone with further questions about sort of the process and the pieces that you might be seeing next?
Map is next, not the process.
The map, because in a sense the comp plan should precede the code. So while we are admittedly, we're kind of in my shop doing them both at the same time, because I would suggest, as we've admitted before, we are better reverse engineers than we are engineers. So what we hope to do is think about what we think the right zones are to implement the various flavors across the community, and then talk with staff about applying those. If we don't have the right number of zones, we're going to have to, add or subtract. So that's kind of the intent, is that we're writing these two in tandem, the zones and the system that points to the zones, which is the map.
Will we create a file for each geography?
Yes.
So we can have that available to us as members?
We can submit that as the document. We'll submit it in PDF as well for those who are not so digitally literate, but yes.
And I would venture to say that you're looking at probably 2 meetings for the mapping. I don't think you can get it done in one. And text you, that's definitely looking at 2 meetings. So what we talked about from a meeting standpoint is if nobody has an objection in January, technical will move up to the 4th, and the working committee will move to the 11th. Well, if there's other conflicts, that works fine. And then in February, the 8th is the technical group, and the 22nd is the working group. And again, I'm at this point in my mind thinking mapping at both of those meetings, and text will be in March, possibly April.
Unless you guys are having so much fun, you would just want to come every other week. You're welcome to do that.
Well,
Will you join?
Via phone, when I can, yes.
that actually was one of the dilemmas, because we do want him to be available. And the week following, the 18th, he's going to be in Saudi Arabia.
I have a Middle Eastern client who is demanding. Let's just leave it at that. So I will be 2 weeks each in the first couple of months of the year there. So.
Okay. What's next?
You can tackle public comment.
Any other discussion for Lee at this point? I'm glad we were able to work through the charrette and a precedent report, because if we didn't, we were going to have to meet in December, and very frankly, I don't think there are any of us who would like to meet in December if we could avoid it. It's a busy enough month the way it is between Christmas, Hanukkah, and Kwanzaa, and every other holiday you can think of. So, yes, ma'am.
We have
You mentioned that you met with each of the town board members
Yes.
today. Is there some way you can summarize the comments from everyone?
Sure. The key thing that we wanted to talk to the town board members about was the path forward. And I think we got some clear insight on a number of issues. One of the pieces of advice is that we really have to know, what can I do today? What are you saying I could do tomorrow? And so working on not just the material that is the actual code amendment and whatever else, but being able to explain to people what's happening to the comp plan map, what's happening to the code, so that they can understand it was 65 feet, now we're proposing 42 feet, or whatever, whatever those changes are. So I think that was one of the key pieces of the conversation. The other is, I think the other strongest insight from the day was really more about positioning the project and being able to say, what is this project about? I would have said, before speaking with the town board, I probably would have said, this is about right-sizing the zoning to different parts of the community. In fact, it goes really one step further, in the sense that we are talking about modifying existing zoning rights to make sure that zoning is more contextual and that it benefits the community. That's what this project is about, and we've not been doing a very good job of saying that. And therefore, the people who have come out to talk with us have been frustrated because they don't really understand that. And in fact, when they've seen the images, they think we're giving people more stuff than they're allowed today, when in fact, in many instances, we're proposing to give them less stuff than they are allowed today. So we'll be trying to do a better job, I think, of explaining that big picture of what the job is about, and asking the question a little bit. We need to get people beyond our 5 or 6 sites to thinking more broadly about the map of the entire community, because I do believe there was a lot of concurrence on a number of sites that we worked on. We didn't hear a whole lot of comment about Gettsville, a whole lot of comment about the transitions we talked about along shallow sites on Transit Road. It seems as though those were done correctly and adequately in people's minds. So let's get those, and let's talk about the remaining sites that are challenging and problematic, and finish out that discussion so we can finish out the code. I think there are right places for taller buildings in town, and we'll make a stab at where those go on the map, and we'll all have a conversation about it. In the end, we'll agree on something. Or if we don't agree, we'll agree to disagree and move it on to the town board at some point. But I think those would be kind of the main takeaways from today's discussion. A simpler way of understanding what the project is about, and then as we move forward, a simple description of what can I do today and what are you saying I could do tomorrow, so that I don't have to get all buried in the weeds of all of the zoning and all of the maps and all of that. I can have something much simpler on the face of things.
Okay. Any other further discussion? All right. We'll open it up for public comment. Any public comment? No? Okay. Then, I guess that's it. We're done for the evening. Well,
Yes.
My name is Anthony Marconi. Deliverable to the state. Do they realize that it's flexible and it doesn't really mean anything?
it's not as though it doesn't mean anything to them. It means something to them from the standpoint that we're fulfilling the requirements of the contract. But they know that it's a work in progress, and they know it's going to change.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right, then I wish all of you a happy Thanksgiving, a Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year. See you in January.